My name is Rachel Doyle. I am 31 years old. For 6 years, I paid my younger sister's rent, covered her car payments, and quietly wired her money every single month so she wouldn't have to tell her love and tell her love said, and see her love with more love, and her love with more love. On the day of my wedding, the day I had saved for and planned for on my own, my husband's ex-girlfriend walked into the reception hall, 8 months pregnant, and announced in front of 200 guests that the baby was his. But what happened 3 weeks later, when I opened a manila envelope my grandmother had been hiding for me, is something I will never forget. I need to start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. I was the responsible one. Every family has one, and in mine, it was me. My younger sister, Madison, was the golden child. 3 years younger, effortlessly charming, the kind of person who could break a lamp and somehow get comforted for the trauma of it. Our parents, Diane and Gary Whitfield, ran a small hardware store in Ohio. Money was tight, but not so tight that it excused the difference in how Madison and I were treated. When I was 14, I got a job bagging groceries so I could buy my own school clothes. When Madison was 14, our mother took a second job cleaning offices so Madison could have a normal childhood and not have to work. I don't say this to be bitter. I say it because it explains everything that came after. By the time I was 22, I had 2 degrees, one in accounting, one in finance, and a job at a regional bank that paid well enough for a person who lived carefully. Madison, at 19, dropped out of community college and moved into an apartment she couldn't afford, because, as my mother put it, she needs the space to grow. That space cost me $650 a month for 4 years. It started small. A missed rent payment here, a just this once there. By 2019, I was sending Madison $650 every month like clockwork, less covering her car insurance, plus a $4,000 loan when her car broke down that she promised to pay back and never did. I kept records. I've always kept records. It's the accountant in me. By the end of 2023, I had given my sister $71,400. 4 years. $71,400. I want you to sit with that number, because I did, for a long time, before I understood what it actually meant. I told myself it was fine. I told myself family helps family. I told myself that one day Madison would get on her feet and everything would balance out. What I didn't know was that my parents were telling her something very different behind closed doors. I want to be clear. My parents never screamed at me. They never called me names. The cruelty was quieter than that, and somehow it hurt more. When I made assistant branch manager at 26, nobody in my family called. I found out 3 days later that my mother had known and simply forgotten to mention it, because Madison had had a rough week. When I turned 28, my birthday dinner was canceled because Madison's boyfriend at the time had a situation. Nobody rescheduled it. When I got engaged to Daniel, my mother's first question wasn't congratulations. It was, well, I hope this doesn't mean you'll stop helping your sister. I laughed it off in the moment. I always laughed it off in the moment. That was my coping mechanism. Smile, absorb it, keep moving. But something in me kept a quiet ledger that had nothing to do with money. I thought I had gotten used to being invisible. I was wrong. I met Daniel Cross at a conference in Columbus in 2021. He was steady in a way I hadn't experienced before, the kind of person who noticed things, small things, like the fact that I flinched every time my phone buzzed with my mother's name. About 8 months into dating, Daniel asked me a question nobody else ever had. Why do you keep paying for a sister who's never once asked how you're doing? I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. I had excuses. She's younger. She's struggling. That's what family does. But Daniel just looked at me with this patient, sad expression, like he could see something I couldn't. It planted a seed. I didn't act on it right away. Old habits don't die from one conversation. But I started noticing things, too, after that. In January of this year, 4 months before the wedding, I was helping my grandmother, Eleanor, organize old paperwork in her garage. She's 82 and was moving into a smaller apartment, and I'd offered to help sort through boxes. In one box, tucked inside a folder labeled Taxes 2020, I found bank statements that weren't mine and weren't my grandmother's South. They were Madison's South. I almost didn't look, but my grandmother, sensing my hesitation, said something I'll never forget. "Read it, sweetheart. I think it's time you knew." The statements showed transfers from my parents' joint account to Madison. Not occasional gifts, but a steady stream, nearly identical in amount to what I was sending her every month. On top of my $650, my parents had been giving her another $800 a month for years. Money they always told me they didn't have when I'd once asked, gently, if they could help with my student loans. Underneath the statements was something worse, a group text thread my grandmother had printed out. One Madison must have sent from my mother's phone by mistake, or maybe not by mistake at all. In it, my mother wrote to Madison, beeswax polished. "Don't worry about Rachel finding out. She'll keep paying no matter what. She always does." I sat on the floor of my grandmother's garage and read that sentence maybe 15 times. She always does. 4 years of $650 checks. A support system I built out of guilt and love. And to them, it wasn't sacrifice. It was a guarantee. A resource. Something they didn't even have to ask for anymore. Because I always did. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I cried, because that's what you'd expect. But I didn't. I just felt something in me go very quiet and very still, like a switch flitting off. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. 2 days later, I canceled the automatic transfer to Madison's account. I didn't send a text explaining why. I didn't post anything. I simply stopped. I also quietly moved $12,000 out of a joint family emergency account my parents had convinced me to contribute to years earlier. Money that, as it turned out, had mostly gone toward Madison's rent whenever she fell behind. I moved my portion into my own savings and said nothing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I thought that was the hardest part. I had no idea what was still coming. The wedding was in May, at a small venue outside Cleveland that Daniel and I had saved for ourselves, without a dollar from either family. 200 guests. String lights. My grandmother in the front row, in a blue dress she'd picked out months in advance. Everything was perfect until the reception, when the doors at the back of the hall opened, and a woman I recognized from old photos walked in. Her name was Kayla Prescott, Daniel's ex-girlfriend from college, someone he hadn't spoken to in 5 years. She was 8 months pregnant, and she walked straight to the microphone at the DJ booth before anyone could stop her. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice shaking but carrying across the whole room. "But I think everyone deserves to know whose baby this is." The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward Daniel, who looked as blindsided as I felt. I want to tell you my first instinct was rage. It wasn't. It was something closer to clarity. I had spent so many years being the person who absorbed chaos quietly, who smoothed things over, who kept paying no matter what, that some part of me recognized this moment for what it was. Another test of whether I would collapse under pressure or hold steady. I walked toward the microphone myself. What happened next is the part nobody at that wedding will ever forget. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked one question, calmly, into the microphone. "Kayla, when is your due date?" She told me. I did the math out loud, in front of 200 guests. The date she gave placed conception nearly 2 months before Daniel and I had even started dating exclusively. But more importantly, 7 months before Daniel had even reconnected with her at a mutual friend's barbecue, an event I had photos of. On my own phone, time-stamped. Daniel, who had gone pale and silent, finally found his voice. "Kayla, we haven't spoken in over a year. You know that's not possible." She broke down, And through the tears, the real story came out. She wasn't trying to blow up my wedding for revenge on Daniel. Her actual boyfriend, the baby's father, had left her when she told him she was pregnant, and in a moment of panic and desperation, she'd convinced herself that naming Daniel, successful, stable Daniel, might solve a problem she didn't know how to face alone. It wasn't a betrayal. It was someone else's terror wearing my wedding as a stage. I felt for her, honestly. But that doesn't mean I let it destroy my night. I asked security to walk her out gently, arranged for someone to make sure she had a safe ride home, and then I turned back to my 200 guests and said, "Let's eat cake." People still talk about that line. Here's the part most people don't expect. It wasn't Kayla who hurt me that week. It was my own family. 3 days later, at the gift opening brunch, my mother pulled me aside and said, "You handled that wedding thing well, but I need to talk to you about something serious. Madison's transfer didn't go through this month. She's behind on rent. You need to fix this. Not, are you okay after your wedding got interrupted? Not, how are you feeling? Just, fix Madison." I looked at my mother and said 4 words. "I'm not paying anymore." The silence that followed was different from the silence at the wedding. This one had teeth. Within a week, my phone was a war zone. Madison called 11 times in 2 days. My father sent a long email accusing me of abandoning family in her time of need. My mother told my aunt at a birthday party that I had turned my back on my own sister, conveniently leaving out the $71,400 and the group text she'd sent Madison behind my back. I didn't argue with any of them individually. Instead, at the 4th of July barbecue that summer, when the whole family was together, aunts, uncles, cousins, my grandmother, I brought a folder. Inside were copies of the transfer records, 4 years of them. Alongside them, a printed copy of the text my mother had sent Madison. "Don't worry about Rachel finding out. She'll keep paying no matter what, she always does." I set it on the picnic table, calm, no raised voice, and said only, "I think everyone should see how this actually worked." My mother's face went white. My father read the message twice, like he thought it might change on a second reading. Madison started crying, but this time, nobody rushed to comfort her. My Aunt Carol, who had watched this dynamic for years without saying anything, finally spoke. "Diane, is this real?" There was no good answer, so my mother didn't give one. The months since then have been quiet, in a way that finally feels earned instead of forced. Madison had to get a full-time job for the first time in her life. Without my $650 and my parents' hidden $800, she couldn't keep the apartment. She moved in with a roommate, something she'd sworn for years she was above. My parents, without the story of a struggling daughter to justify to relatives, started facing questions at every family gathering about where all that money had actually gone. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The math simply caught up with everyone at once, the way it always eventually does. My grandmother, meanwhile, started coming to dinner at our place every other Sunday. Daniel makes her the roast chicken she likes, she told me once, over dishes. I kept that folder for 2 years, waiting for the right time to give it to you. I'm sorry it took so long. I told her it was exactly the right time. Any earlier, and I don't think I would have believed it. Any later, and I might never have stopped paying at all. People ask me if I regret those 4 years, the $71,400, the birthdays nobody remembered, the years of being the responsible one while someone else got the softness. I don't. Not entirely. Those years taught me the difference between love and obligation. And that's not a lesson you can learn any other way except by living through it. But I'll tell you what I tell anyone who asks now. The people who truly love you do not keep a ledger of how much you'll tolerate. They don't count on your guilt like a recurring paycheck. Family, real family, is not a monthly transfer. It's the people who show up on a random Sunday to eat roast chicken, no folder required. The silence after I stopped paying was the loudest, most honest thing my family had said to me in years. It was worth every bit of it.